Hi guys, I hope you're doing well, and in this video we're going to be solving October November 2017 paper 12, and this is a good paper actually. So let's get started without wasting any time. Question number 1 says economist refers to factors of production, okay, which is not a factor of production. So the fields of a farm are a factor of production because it comes in land. The machinery is capital. The shares of a company is the answer because share is not a factor of production. It is a source of financing for a business. It is a means by which a business raises finance. So the staff in the office is considered as labor. So this is a factor of production as well. So C is the correct answer. Question number 2 says a government allowed a building to construct new houses which destroyed an area designated as an area of natural beauty. So definitely this is kind of referring to as external cost. So which concept can be applied in this statement? So let's see. So again, B should be the correct answer because only this is the answer option which has external cost. But let's see why is A, C, and D not the correct answer. So A, it's talking about budget surplus in public sector. So yes, they're talking about the public sector because it mentions government, but nothing is mentioned about budget surplus because that is the excess of tax revenue over spending. That is what the government spends on the economy. Part 3, nothing is mentioned about subsidies and nothing is mentioned about the economic system as well. Private enterprise, yes, they're talking about a building company which can be considered as a private sector enterprise. But again, no mention is made about budget deficit because obviously they are not talking about, they haven't mentioned anything about whether the expenditures of the government is exceeding the tax revenues because the budget deficit arises when the government spending exceeds the tax revenue. So B is the correct answer. Yes, it also has opportunity cost in it because obviously the government could have instead of allowing the building company to construct a new house, we could have constructed something else as well, and so there is an opportunity cost in terms of the houses that has been built because something else could have also have been built apart from houses. Maybe the money could have been spent on building dams, but also there's an opportunity cost to society as well in terms of external cost because the where the house is constructed, the house could have constructed, or the whole housing society could have been constructed on some other place as well other than this place of natural beauty. So there's an opportunity cost as well. Okay, so question number 3 says the diagram shows a production possibility curve. The country is using all its resources to produce both manufactured goods and services. What movement would represent an improvement of technology in manufacturing? So whenever the technology improves the PPC, it actually shifts to the right. So the PPC actually shifts to the right, and but since this technological advancement has only occurred in the manufacturing sector, which means that only the manufactured goods capacity has enhanced, the productive potential to produce more capital goods has actually enhanced. In that scenario, whenever only one particular goods productive capacity or the potential has increased, the PPC in that case pivots outwards. So for example, let's suppose on the x-axis if I have good x and on the y-axis I have good y, and let's say if the capacity to produce good x is actually increasing, so I would actually pivot my PPC from this point. This is actually representing an increase in productive capacity to produce more of good x, right? And if let's say this is my production possibility curve and I say that let's say there's technological advancement in producing good y, or maybe more resources to produce y are discovered, or maybe there's an investment in education or the healthcare sector of workers that actually let's say are specific to producing good y. In that case, what is going to happen is that the PPC will shift to the right, but it will shift to the right not parallel, but there would be a pivotal shift, and in that case it would shift like this, which is actually representing that the capacity to produce more good y has actually enhanced. The same is happening over here as well, that since technological advancement has taken place in the manufacturing sector, so the capacity to produce more manufactured goods has actually increased, and in this case you will pivot our PPC outwards, right? So what will happen is that we will pivot the PPC, and so what will happen is that so now we can see, So now we can clearly see after the shift in PPC to the right that, let's say if we were producing 100 services and let's say 100 manufactured goods, but now how much are we producing? Now we are producing, let's say, 130 manufactured goods and let's say a bit of more services as well, that is 120. Now you might ask that why are we producing more services when the capacity of production of services has not increased. I agree that the capacity to produce, that the capacity of enhancement of services has not increased. But again, the maximum capacity to produce services had not reached full potential even when we were on the original PPC curve, because the maximum potential to produce services is, let's say, over here till let's say 170, right? So in terms of services, we haven't reached our full potential in terms of services, so we still have a lot more services to offer using our resources. So definitely what happens is that when the PPC pivots outwards, we're producing both more manufactured goods as well as more services as well. So that is why an improvement of technology would actually result into a movement from point N to point M. So D is the correct answer. What is the government most likely to produce in a mixed economic system? So in a mixed economic system is a system where both the private and the public sector are allocating resources simultaneously, and both are responsible for decision making in the business in terms of allocating resources like what, how, and for whom to produce. And in a mixed economic system, the government can actually intervene to reduce or regulate market failure. So the answer to question number 4 should be a D for David, because obviously what is the government most likely to produce? Obviously the government will produce some kind of goods and services. The answer can't be A, because obviously the private sector is also producing the goods and services, and the government is most likely to produce in a mixed economic amount of goods and services that is equal to those of the private sector. Obviously no, we can't say that with an accurate estimate. No goods and services, which is also not the correct answer, because the government does produce goods and services. Question number 5 says, which of the effects of economic development is an external cost? So economic development is where economic growth takes place. Economic development goes one step beyond economic growth, because economic development results into an economic growth in such a way that it enhances the economic welfare of society, the living standard of society. It results into the society being more developed, right? But the problem is that economic development does result into an improvement in welfare, but again it also results into some form of external cost, because industrialization and the manufacturing processes that are involved during the process of economic development and economic growth, they result into negative externalities. Hence David is the correct answer, D, because it results into increased traffic congestion. Definitely economic development would result into more external cost in various forms, and traffic congestion is an example of external cost. So question 5 is D. Question number 6 says, the table illustrates the demand and supply for coffee in a market in Africa. When the price rises from 20 to 30, what is the price elasticity of demand? So price elasticity of demand is telling you the response, or how will quantity demanded respond whenever the price changes. So we know that we know that whenever price rises, quantity demanded falls, and when price falls, quantity demanded rises. But by how much? That will actually be given by the price elasticity of demand. So it's telling us the response of quantity demanded to a price change, right? And the formula for that is the percentage change in quantity demanded divided by the percentage change in price. Very simple. So if price is rising from 20 to 30, it actually represents 50% increase in price. So the price is rising by 50%, right? And let's see, whenever the price rises from 20 to 30, what happens to quantity demanded? So quantity supplied column is kind of irrelevant for this question. So prices, we can clearly see that price is falling from 40 to it is falling 30. And if you want to calculate the percentage change for anything, the simple formula is new, right, minus old divided by old times 100. So the new quantity is 30 minus the old quantity, which is 40, upon the old quantity, which is 40, times 100. And you can apply this formula to calculate the percentage change in price as well. So the answer to this would be how much? The answer to this would be, you know, what is, it would be 25%. So the percentage change in quantity demanded is negative 25%, since quantity demanded is falling, and hence the PD would be equal to 0.5, negative 0.5. So B should be the correct answer. Why negative? Because it's showing an inverse relation between price and quantity demanded. If price is rising, the quantity demanded is falling, and always PED would, the value for PED would always come into negative. 0.5 is basically the coefficient or the value of elasticity. So for 6, B is the correct answer. Question number 7 says, it was reported that the supply of oil would be affected by the discovery of new oil fields, okay, and demand would be affected by rapid global economic growth. So usually in these kind of questions, these in the recent years, we have seen that examiner is usually giving, it is testing a shift in demand and supply both. So remember, if the equilibrium is a state of balance between demand and supply, where they both are equal. So the original equilibrium would be when demand equals to supply. If either the demand is changing, so the new equilibrium would be when the new demand intersects the old supply, and if supply is changing, it would be when the new supply intersects the old demand, and if both are changing, then it would be when the new demand intersects the new supply, right? So these are the different ways in which an equilibrium can be formed. So for question number 7, the answer should be C. Why? Because what's happening is that the discovery of new oil fields accompanied by and demand would be affected by rapid global economic growth. So obviously when there's rapid global economic growth, so what is going to happen? Definitely it will increase your demand, because when your incomes are rising, so your demand will actually increase, and demand for oil will increase because of more economic growth, since more businesses are expanding, so they would definitely need more oil. So demand for oil will rise, and since more oil is now discovered because of new oil fields being discovered, supply of oil will also rise. So where, just like I said, where the new demand curve is intersecting the new supply curve. So it's not necessary. So D1 is not necessarily means that this D1 is equal to this D1. By D1 I mean the new demand curve. By S1 I mean the new supply curve. So the new demand curve is where the demand curve has shifted to D3, and the new supply curve is where it has shifted to S3, right? So this is, so as a result, C is the correct answer. I hope you understood this. Question number 8 says, what is likely to decrease the level of saving in an economy? Remember that income, which is denoted by Y, is always equal to the amount of money the amount you consume plus the amount you save, right? So saving is something. So saving does not involve consumption. Saving is that you're not consuming. So question 8. The answer to question 8 should be an increase in the general level of income. No, because if incomes are rising, savings should rise. So hence A is the incorrect answer. B says an increase in the number of cheap offers in shops. Now this seems kind of correct. Question C, part C says a redistribution of income from poor to the rich households. A redistribution of income from poor to rich would not decrease saving, but in fact it would increase saving. Why? Because if incomes are redistributed from poor to the rich, it means that the rich are getting richer, and as a result, we know that rich people save more money as compared to poor people who spend more money because they have less incomes, right? So that is why C is also the incorrect answer. And part D says a rise in the rate of interest. A rise in the rate of interest would make savings more attractive because people will save money in banks to earn those high rates of interest. Because right now, for an individual, saving would result into more incomes and more benefit in terms of more money, because obviously the more interest I earn, the more money I get in future. So instead of consuming, he would save, right? He can consume at a later date as well. So practically or rationally, more allocative decision or rational decision or an efficient decision would be for a rational person would be to invest that money. So B is the correct answer, increase in the number of cheap offers in shop, because obviously when you're getting more discounts, so people will spend that money, because obviously discounts will end after a certain time. So then people won't get the opportunity later on again. So instead of saving, they would spend the money. So it's just about the question of how rational you're spending your money, what decisions you're taking. Is spending right now more rational, or consumption right now is more rational? So at times these kind of MCQs do come in your papers, where they, so you have to think in ways where spending is more beneficial right now or saving is more beneficial right now. Question number 9 says, what which change will make a manufacturing company replace machines with labor to maintain the most efficient combination of factors of production? So replacing machines with labor is substituting the machines for labor, right? So obviously this will only happen if labor is more becoming more cheaper than machines, or the wage cost is falling than the capital cost, that is the price of labor. Or it also happens because of the productivity. So first of all, it could be due to the price of labor, but since the price of labor is not mentioned in the question in terms of the price of labor falling, so hence this is not the correct answer. So, and it can also happen because of the productivity, not production, productivity of labor. Productivity is basically a measure of efficiency. So I've written productivity here, not efficiency. So productivity or efficiency, that is how much output can workers generate in terms of the input, or in terms of the number of hours they are actually putting to work. So productivity of labor would definitely have increased. That is why businesses are deciding to replace machines with labor, as that decision is more rational for the firms, and they would get a more value of output. They would be able to produce more units through labor than machines, and hence able to generate more revenues and profits as well. Question number 10 says, although there are higher paid jobs in offices, many workers stay in low paid jobs on farms. Okay, what might explain this in developing countries? Developing countries are poor countries. Agricultural workers lack the necessary education and skills. Definitely, this is the correct answer, because in developing economies, a lot of farmers, they don't have the required education and skills to actually, work in offices, in skilled jobs, and that creates a lot of over dependency on the agricultural sector. And remember, due to whenever there will be a structural shift, or in industry, the structural shift in industries, if these economies start becoming more developed and more richer, and the demand for manufacturing and service sector rises, these uh, poor farmers would be unemployed, because no one would be willing to hire them, because they don't have those skills, right? So that is why we say that we should improve or enhance occupational mobility. So we should enhance occupational mobility, because how should we enhance occupational mobility? Through training, through specialization, through education, and through vocational training as well. Providing vocational training, the government should provide vocational training. That is the necessary skills required to get those people, the minimum skills that are required to get those people into jobs. Okay, so question number 11 says that the diagram shows two curves. One is the demand for labor and the other is the supply of labor. So this is the demand for labor and the supply of labor. A government fixes a minimum wage that must be paid by employers. What will be the effect of this minimum wage? So first, let's understand what a minimum wage actually is. A minimum wage is basically a wage that is imposed by the government on the employers, instructing them and forcing them to not pay below this wage rate. So it's a kind of a government intervention in the labor market. So this is your market wage rate, right? And this is the wage rate. Let's say it's $100, and $100 is the wage rate that is determined by the free market, depending upon the demand and the supply of labor. And the government would intervene in the market, because this wage rate might be too low for some of the low paid workers, or some of the workers who are poor, right, coming from poor families, because they won't be able to meet their needs in this wage rate, right? Because wages are not determined according to how much labor, how much they are actually helping the labor in satisfying their needs and wants. It is actually determined based on how many workers firms are willing and able to hire, as compared to the supply of workers, right? So according to that mechanism of demand and supply of workers, the market wage rates are determined. So a minimum wage is imposed above the market wage rate, right? And this is the minimum wage rate, which suggests that the government will impose a minimum wage, suggesting the firms to, instructing them and in fact forcing them to, pay, let's say, assuming, hypothetically saying that, forcing them to pay a minimum of, $150. So a minimum wage rate is effective when it is imposed above the market wage rate, because only then it would make sense. In this question, it is actually imposed below the wage rate, where you are actually saying that, $100 is the market wage rate, but you have to pay a minimum of, let's say, $70. So obviously, if you have to pay a minimum of $70 and you can't, so obviously, if you are supposed to pay a minimum of $70, then you will end up paying the market wage rate, because that is the market wage rate, yeah, right? And so there was no point in imposing a minimum wage below the equilibrium. When you're imposing a when you are forcing someone to pay a minimum of $70, however the market wage rate is $100. However, if you impose a law saying that the minimum wage rate is $150, only then it would make sense, because now you're actually saying that, whatever wage rate you want to give to workers, you give it, but you can't give anything that is below $150. So only then this makes sense. So minimum wages are imposed to, help improve the welfare of the workers, the welfare of the poor workers, so that the employers do not exploit them by paying, below the minimum wage rate, because in some occupations the market wage rate might be too low for some workers, right? However, some people also argue that minimum wages also, reduces the demand for labor, and hence it, creates unemployment as well, because for instance, if let's say this is the demand for labor and this is the supply of labor, and you see this is, let's say, for instance, this is the market wage rate, and let's say 200 people are employed in any particular occupation, and the government imposes a minimum wage of, let's say, $150, right? So obviously it will reduce the demand for labor to, let's say, 170 people, and it would increase the supply of labor to, let's say, 220 people. So again, this is actually representing workers who are without jobs, because now you have workers who are you have 20 more workers in that occupation, while firms are willing to employ 30 less workers. So it makes a total of 50 workers who are without jobs, right? So these are your unemployed workers. So in one hand, yes, it does create unemployment as well. So in that sense, it reduces welfare. However, for the workers who are actually employed by firms, for these 170 workers that will be employed by firms, definitely they would be getting a much higher wage rate of, let's say, $150, instead of being paid $100, right? So yes. So the answer to this MCQ is, question number 11 is B, because obviously there won't be any change in market equilibrium, because definitely a market wage rate of $100 would be paid, and whatever the number of workers that are employed, let's say n number of workers were employed at a wage rate of $100, so that would still persist. The firms would end up employing, let's say, n is 100 workers, so firms would still end up employing 100 workers and paying them $100. So a minimum wage below the equilibrium is totally ineffective. Question number 12 says, which is an internal diseconomies of scale? Diseconomies of scale arises when your average cost rises, when you exceed output too quickly and too much beyond a certain size, beyond once you've achieved your lowest average cost and then you exceed your output, that results into diseconomies of scale. So all the output in this region would actually be representing an area where the firm is experiencing diseconomies, and diseconomies manifest itself in terms of management barriers, communication barriers, which falling productivity of workers, reducing efficiency of workers, and that results into a rise in cost per unit of goods produced, resulting into a disaster for firms. So question number 12, the answer would be A, that is a lack of communication in a firm. Question number 13 says, what distinguishes a multinational company from other types of companies? A multinational company is a company that is a large company. It is in the private sector, right? So it is part of private sector. It is a large company. A multinational company is a company that operates in more than one country, but it has its head office in the country of origin. So question 13, the answer to question 13 would be C, because it produces the operations would be outside its country of operation as well. So the country of origin would also host the multinational company originally founded, and then outside countries would also be hosting operations of the multinational companies as well. Question 14 says a major computer company announced that its profits had fallen below the level predicted. What might have caused this? So profits are basically falling. Now profits, the formula to calculate profit is total revenue minus total cost. So anything that would reduce total revenue and anything that would actually increase total cost would reduce profits. So if sales are improving, so for instance, if advertising cost is incurred, that actually increases your total cost. But if your sales improve, that is your total revenue significantly increases, that offsets the rise in cost. So your overall profit should actually rise. Low prices making the company competitive. So obviously if the company is competitive, that will increase the quantity sold, and if quantity sold will rise by greater than the fall in price, so hence total revenue will rise and your profits will definitely rise as well. New technology that reduce costs. Obviously technology enhances efficiency and it makes the product more competitive, and it results into a fall in your average cost. So what is happening is that those cost advantages would be translated in the form of lower prices for consumers, making the product competitive, and hence it would increase your total revenue for the firm as well. So reduce sales and low prices is the correct answer, because what is happening is that your sales are falling and you've also reduced your prices, so your total revenue is actually falling over here. So that is why the profits should actually fall. That is why 14 is part D is the correct answer. 15 says the table shows the variable cost of a firm. It can sell the units for 5 each. Variable cost they directly vary with output, such as raw material cost, an example of variable cost, labor cost, an example of variable cost, because the more you produce, the more the raw material is incurred and the more the labor is being paid. It can sell the units for 5 each, so this is the selling price. Its fixed costs are 10. Okay, so how many units will the firm produce to maximize profits? So let's say how many units. So first of all, like I said in the previous MCQ, the formula for profit is total revenue minus total cost. So let's do one thing. Let's first calculate the total cost. The total cost is the sum of fixed cost plus your variable cost. So your variable cost is 20, your fixed cost is 10, and remember that the fixed cost would stay constant at each level of output because it stays the same. So your total cost would be actually 30, and then this would be 40, and this would be 50, and this would be 60. So let's calculate sales as well. Let's calculate total revenue, which is sales, and the formula is price times the quantity that is sold. The price is $5 for each unit, multiplied by, let's say if you're selling 10 units, so it's $50 for 10 units, and then it's $55, and then 12 times 5 would be 60, and then 13 times 5 would be 10 times 5 is 50, plus 3 times 5, that is 15, is 65. So again, now let's calculate the profit. So the profit for the first one would be for 10 units, you're getting a profit of, let's say, total revenue minus total cost. So you deduct 50 from 30, so you get a profit of 20. Then you get a profit of 55 minus 40 is, I don't have a calculator with me, so just taking time. 60 minus 50 is 10, and then this would be 5. So the highest profit that you're making is $20, which is happening when you're producing 10 units, right? So what is the answer? The answer would be A, that is 10 units, because it's asking you how many units will the firm produce to maximize profits. So 15A is the correct answer. The firm would produce 10 units if it wants to maximize its profits. What when increase will help a government to reduce the rate of inflation? Inflation is an increase in the general level of prices when things for an average consumer is becoming expensive. It is calculated using the consumer price index, where your cost of living starts to rise and your value of money starts to fall. So what when increase will help the government to reduce the rate of inflation? So the government wants to actually reduce the inflation. So if it wants to reduce the inflation, it has to reduce the aggregate demand in the economy, and that can be reduced through through increasing the budget deficit? No, because increasing the budget deficit would actually increase inflation. Why? Because budget deficit would definitely rise when the government spending rises, and that is greater than the amount of tax revenues that are collected. So government spending would increase aggregate demand, hence it would increase the amount of inflation in the economy, and this is the incorrect answer. If you increase consumer spending, definitely AD will rise, hence demand upon inflation would rise as well. This is the incorrect answer. C is the correct answer, because if you increase income taxes, your disposable incomes will fall, which will result into lower consumer spending, and that would result into lower aggregate demand, hence creating deflation, right? C is the correct answer. 17 says the government introduces a new tax. It adds $1 to every $10 goods and $2 to the price of every $20 goods. So if a good is worth, let's say, $10, the government is adding $1 to it, which is the amount of tax, and it is adding $2 to if the good is worth $20 in the market. So remember that all those taxes that are added to the price of the good are indirect taxes, because they're actually being added on the product or on the firm's product, or you can say on the price of the product. So that is why indirect taxes are also known as expenditure taxes, right? And also one more thing, that indirect taxes are of two types. That is, number one, specific tax, and you can say ad valorem tax. Ad valorem tax. My spelling is really bad. So specific tax is basically a per unit tax which is imposed, and this is imposed on per unit of the good being produced. So let's say the government could impose a $1 tax on each additional unit that the firm is producing, right? This is a specific tax, and this results into a parallel shift to the left in the supply curve. And I'll just make the diagram that it would result into a parallel shift in the supply curve to the left, because the cost of production is rising. Since an indirect tax, it's imposed on the firm, on the product, and that is why it is increasing the cost of the firm. However, an ad valorem tax is basically imposed on the price of the product. For instance, you can say, let's suppose if the price is, let's say, $20, the government could say, just like in this question, it's saying that if the price is $20, it is imposing a tax of $2, or let's say if it is $20, so it's imposing a tax of, let's say, 10%. So whenever a percentage is imposed on the price of the product, or you can say when it is imposed per when it is imposing a specific number to the price of the product, that is an ad valorem tax. And the higher the price, remember, the higher the price, the greater would be the ad valorem or the indirect tax imposed on the firm. So actually here in that case, the supply curve does not shift parallel, but there's an ad valorem shift. It shifts like this. That is why you have to draw it like this in the exam. Anyways, since it's an MCQ paper, so just for your knowledge I'm telling you. So that is why for this particular MCQ, the answer would be, is it a direct tax? No, obviously it's not an indirect tax, it's an indirect tax. Direct taxes are not imposed on the product, they are neither imposed on the price, they are neither imposed on the firm, neither they are known as expenditure taxes. Direct taxes are those taxes that are imposed on people's wealth, on people's income, and on firms' profits, and they are paid directly by the firm, by the people on whom they are imposed. And the examples include, let's say, corporate tax. Now, what is corporate tax? It is imposed on firms' profits. Number two, you can say income tax. Income tax is imposed on people's incomes. And let's say wealth tax, imposed on people's wealth, on their properties, on their wealth. Financial and non-financial wealth, physical wealth. So it's not an indirect tax, right? So is it a specific tax? No, it's not a specific tax. It's an ad valorem tax. Like I said, it is imposed on the price of the product. Is it a progressive tax? Neither it is progressive. Now, progressive tax is not a type of tax, but you can say it's a nature of tax. Progressive taxes are basically those taxes which have a nature, as such, which the nature of the tax is that basically the higher the incomes of people or the firms, the higher the firm's profits, the more will be the percentage or the burden of tax. So if the tax is progressive in nature, then the burden of the tax falls more on the rich or the upper class or the people with higher incomes. That is why we say that the tax is actually progressing as you actually increase your income. So the more the incomes, the more the tax, right? So that is why it's actually known as progressive, and that is why we say that lower income groups end up paying less amount of progressive taxes. So the burden of tax on the poor is very less. It is based on their incomes, and that is why all the direct taxes are actually progressive in nature, right? Remember that. And the more the tax is progressive or direct taxes, the both they lead to an equal distribution of income, because it reduces the gap between the rich and the poor. Because why? Because the rich are taxed according to their ability to pay, right? And the poor are taxed according to their ability to pay. However, indirect taxes, remember that all indirect taxes are regressive in nature. What do you mean by regressive? Regressive in nature means that the burden of tax is actually falling more on the poor than the rich. And it's very simple, because let's say if you buy a water bottle that is worth, let's say, $30, and out of $30, let's say $3 is the amount of, let's say, GST or sales tax, which is an indirect tax, and this $30 bottle will obviously be bought both by a person who is rich and a person who is poor, because it's not that the shopkeeper would give a discount to the poor person now, which means that the poor person also ends up paying the $3 tax, and the rich person also ends up paying the $3 tax. So both are paying the same amount of tax. However, both people's ability and incomes is quite different, right? So that is kind of unfair or unequal. That is why we say it leads to an unequal income distribution and a negative welfare in society. So hope you understood this. That is why A is the correct answer, and because it's not progressive. Okay, moving forward, 18 says, again, remember that these kind of questions where they test you on indirect taxes, they test you on direct taxes, their nature, what are progressive, regressive, types of indirect taxes, types of direct taxes, what kind of impact can they have. Usually 1 or 2 MCQs are tested on this. The graph shows the percentage of income paid in tax, that is the proportion of income that is paid in tax. This is telling us the proportion of income paid in tax, proportion of income that you end up paying in tax, and in fact it is your tax burden, you can also say that, right? So which represents a proportional tax? Proportional tax is a tax where your tax burden, that is a proportion or the percentage of income that you pay in tax, is basically same irrespective of your income. So even if you end up earning more income, you will end up paying the burden of tax, or the proportion of tax you were paying before, when your income was, let's say, $100, would exactly be the percentage of tax paid even when your income is, let's say, 200, would also be, let's say, if this was 10%, then this would also be 10%. So you'll end up paying the proportion of tax that you will end up paying out of your income, despite that your incomes have increased. So your tax burden would be constant, it would be the same. And that is why the D should be the correct answer, because it's a horizontal straight line, right? So 18 is D. 19 says a worker earns 40,000 a year and pays 20% of income tax. Which is the direct tax. He spends 5,000 on electrical goods and 10,000 on car and pays 20% sales tax on each. How much indirect tax he pays? So his total expenditure is 15,000, and out of that, obviously 20% sales tax is imposed. So how much is the sales tax? 3,000 should be the answer. So 19 is actually A. This is so. Your sales tax is your indirect tax, like I told in the previous MCQ as well. Question 20, why is HDI often considered to be better than GDP? And this is often a repeated MCQ. The reason why HDI is better than GDP is because, first of all, it is a composite index. Now, what do you mean by that? It includes three important indicators for measuring living standards. First of all, it includes GDP per capita, that is your income per person or income per head. Per capita means how much a person is earning on an average in a year. So let's say if GDP per capita is, let's say, $100, it means that on an average person earns $100 a year. Number two, it tells us about the adult literacy rate as well. That is, what is the adult literacy rate in the country, and it also tells about the life expectancy at birth, right? So obviously it's telling us, the amount of life an average person will have when he is born. So definitely life expectancy, adult literacy rate, they both are important indicators, along with the GDP per capita, that is a measure of economic development and economic growth as well. So it's giving a more holistic view of living standards, and that is why it is more better than GDP, because it's a more holistic or a more it's a more broad view of what of your living standards. The more the HDI, remember, is close to 1, let's say 0.8, 0.9, the better the more developed the country is. The more the HDI is close to 0, let's say 0.1 is more closer to 0 than it is to 1, so it means the less developed the country is. So question number 20, the answer should be C, because it includes more than the production of goods and services such as adult literacy rate and life expectancy at birth. Okay, so question number 21 says a finance minister reported the economy is experiencing inflation and economic growth. Inflation is when your price level is rising, things are getting expensive, and economic growth is when your GDP is increasing. What would be the evidence that both of these had occurred? Now, okay, so increased exports and increased output. Increased output is, yes, a sign of economic growth, but increase in exports does not necessarily means that inflation would occur, because why? Because for aggregate demand to rise, there are other components of AD as well, and we take the net exports in our as part of aggregate demand. So definitely, what if the imports are greater than exports? In that case, AD would be actually falling instead of rising, so inflation will not occur. So increased imports and increased income tax, again, imports, if imports are rising, so your economy should experience deflation instead of inflation, which is a fall in the price level. And if your income tax is increasing, that should reduce your disposable incomes and hence reduce your consumer expenditure, hence reduce your AD, and hence reduce your inflation. That is result into falling prices. Increasing interest rate would reduce borrowing, and hence consumer expenditure and investments both will fall, because consumers will borrow less and firms will borrow less, hence they will invest less and consumers will spend less, and as a result AD will fall, hence deflation would occur. Increase in net migration, again, doesn't make sense, because you can't really, although yes, increase in net migration, you can say that again, the point is that we really don't know that, we can't really be sure about. So increase in net migration, if your net migration is increasing, which means that your okay, so part D says increase prices and increase employment. This is the correct answer, because because employment increases when economic growth is rising, since it creates more job opportunities. So 22 would be, the diagram shows the percentage employment in different sectors in two countries. Okay, so you have country X and then you have country Y, and you have three sectors for both countries, and it shows the percentage of people that are employed, of labor that is employed in each sector. So country X has 50% people employed in primary, let's say 35 employed in secondary, and let's say close to 20, let's say 18% employed in your tertiary sector, and let's say 70% of the people are employed in your service sector in country Y. So it refers to the percentage employed, right? It's not giving you the labor force, neither it's giving you the number of people employed. It's giving you the percentage employed, right? Remember. So which statement is correct when comparing country X and country Y? So, um, so the first statement says country X employs more workers in secondary industry than country Y. So obviously a lot of people might end up marking this answer, because if he's because what they'll see is, they'll say, okay, fine, this bar, this size, the size of this column, the size of this bar chart is much greater than the size of this bar chart. A lot of people make this common mistake. They'll say that this looks bigger than this, and as a result this should be the answer. Why? Because, but the problem is that they're not seeing what we are measuring on the y-axis. We are measuring the percentage of people employed, we're not measuring the number of people employed. So we can't say that the country X is employing more workers in secondary sector, and I'll tell you, I'll prove that mathematically. Although we can say that country X employs as a percentage of the labor force, yes, it employs more people in secondary. The percentage employed in secondary sector is much greater than the percentage employed in secondary sector in country Y, but not the number of people employed. And a clear example is that, let's say that there are two countries, country X and country Y, and let's say that in country X there are, let's say, you know, 35% people that are employed in country X. So let's say that the labor force in country X is, let's say, 100 people in country X, let's assume. So how many people are in the secondary sector? If let's say 35%, 35 workers are in the secondary sector. In country Y, let's say that the labor force is, let's say, 500 people. And how many people are employed in the secondary sector? 20%. So that would actually be how many workers? That would make up 500 to 20% of 500 would be 100 workers. So 100 workers in country Y. So you can clearly see that there are 100 workers in country Y that are employed in the secondary sector, but there are only 35% workers that are employed in the secondary sector in country X. So who is employing more workers in secondary sector, country X or Y? Clearly, if we see this comparison, we can say that, country Y is employing more. But in this table, in this bar chart on the y-axis, it's not measuring the number of workers employed in the secondary sector, it's measuring the percentage employed. So although country X is employing 30, it's employing country X is employing 35% workers in the secondary sector, and country Y is only employing 20% workers in the secondary sector, but still country Y has a higher or more number of workers out of its labor force working in the secondary sector, right? Because how many workers are actually employed depend in either of the sector depends upon what is the labor force. The size of the labor force of country Y is greater than the size of the labor force of country X. So even if country Y is employing a less percentage, the number of workers would the value of the number of workers, the size of the number of workers would definitely exceed country X size of number of workers employed in secondary sector. So remember, when the percentages are given, don't mistake it as actual absolute values, right? So this is not the answer. So the correct answer for this MCQ, by the way, is option C, because obviously in country Y is more developed. How can we judge that? Because country Y employs 70% of workers in in the tertiary sector, in your tertiary sector, as compared to country X that employs only, let's say, 18% workers in the tertiary sector. So definitely country Y is more developed. This kind of conclusion is more realistic than concluding based on then making a conclusion on the number of workers, which we can't make out from this graph because we don't have the relevant data provided, right? So remember, don't make these kind of mistakes in your exam. Question number 23 says, what would be the cause of cost push inflationary pressure in an industry which supplies mobile phones? So cost push inflation is an inflation that occurs due to whenever there's a rise in the costs of different industries in the economy, maybe because of trade union pressure or rise in key raw materials, right? So maybe now they're talking about a specific industry, which is cell phones. So obviously there might be a possibility that the cost is rising. And why is cost rising? Because of an increase in advertising expense for the cell phones, which is causing a cost push inflationary pressure on an industry that supplies cell phones, right? So an increase in export duties would have an impact on exports and hence have an impact on aggregate demand, nothing to do with cost push inflationary pressures. An increase in income taxes on the wages of employees would again impact aggregate demand, nothing to do with cost push inflationary pressures, because that would have an impact on demand pull inflation. In fact, increase in world demand for mobile phones will actually result into more demand pull inflationary pressures instead of cost push inflationary pressure. So 23A is the correct answer. Question 24 says, what is most likely to cause an increase in the population growth of a developing country? So a poor country is likely to experience an increase in population growth because of either an increase in you can say birth rates, or maybe a decrease in death rates. So C is the correct answer. A decrease in immigration would actually reduce the population because less people will be coming in the country. A decrease in birth rate would reduce the population. However, a decrease in death rate would actually increase the population. So this is the correct answer. A decrease in standard of living, would has nothing to do, is not, we can't really, although we can say that if standard of living is falling, people are more we can make it with a conclusion of people not being that educated enough and not having family planning and all of that. But so a decrease in living standard might, we can say that people are uneducated, hence they won't do family planning and not use contraceptive measures, and as a result of that, more birth rate. But that's a very long route that we are taking, and this statement is not really, not 100% true. So a more we have a clear certain answer option in front of us, that is option C, so we'll choose that. So remember, a lot of these a lot of kids kind of make these kind of mistakes when they try to connect the MCQs with certain concepts. But though, although it does make sense at some point, but try to pick out those MCQs that makes more sense, that are certain, instead of picking out those MCQs that are more uncertain, right? Question 25 is a population structure is given in country in 1960 and 2015, right? It's a population pyramid that is given, also known as a population structure or population pyramid. So this population structure is basically, you can say, what is it doing? It is basically dividing or distributing or measuring the size of the population, or it is measuring your total population and dividing it into, you can say, males and your females, into two different genders with different ages, of different ages, right? So let's say people who are in the age of between 20 to 20 to 24 years old. So in 1960 you had, let's say, approximately 2 million people, 2 million males, close to 2 million males, and you had close to, let's say, 2 million females as well in 1960. But let's say in 2015 you had approximately more than 2 million males in 2015, that is between the age of 20 to 24. And even for females you had more than, you can say, 2 million females as well. So the population, so on an overall level, if I clearly analyze, I can clearly see that, if I compare the size of these um, boxes or these rectangles that are representing the size of the population in millions, clearly the size of these boxes is clearly rising, which is, and on an overall level, just by looking at a glance of it, I can clearly see that these boxes are clearly representing a higher value, because in 1960 we could see that the population that is from middle aged till the population that goes, that is the aged population, where your people are aged around 80, 85 plus. So we could, so from middle to the aged population, we can clearly see that the size of that population that ranges from 40s to, and it goes up to 85, the size of that population has clearly increased, because your middle aged population was less than 1 million in 1960s. If you can clearly see that the males and females were kind of, less than 1 million, and the more you were going up, the less were the people that existed, less than 1 million, the more you went up the age of the population in 1960. But in 2015 it shows that living standards have increased, health sector has improved, which shows that, you have more aging population, and people do exist up till 80. You have people, you have females living up till 85 years of age, and you have approximately, you can say, how much, 0.5 million females. Initially you had, how much you can say, how many females, it was close to, I was just measuring it, it was just close, okay, I'm not able to measure it properly, but it was just close to 0. But you guys understand the concept. What I'm trying to say here is, which clearly shows that there's a rise in the population size, hence the total population is definitely not rising. This is not telling you the average age. In fact, it is measuring the size of the people, or you can say it is measuring the, not the size of the people, it is measuring the total population, divided into different ages, but it's not giving you the purpose of this is not to measure the age of the population, right? This is not how you measure the age of the average age of the population. But what decreased between 1960 and 2015? The correct answer to question number 25 is B, because the number of people who are below 15, let's say the number of people below 15, let's say, were are definitely falling in this bracket, right? So if you look at the size of these boxes and you compare it with the size of these boxes, definitely the number of people who were below 15 have decreased, because if you see people who were in the age of 0 to 4 definitely have decreased, which shows that the birth rate has definitely fallen. Again, people in the age bracket of 5 to 9 again have also decreased in 1960, and same goes for people in the age of 10 to 14 as well. Although the rate of decline as compared to people who were in 0 to 9 years of age, the rate of decline is not as that rapid. But yes, even people who were between 10 to 14 years of age have declined in size, both males and females. So yes, the correct answer is B. Why is it not C? It is not C because the number of people over 60 have actually increased, not decreased. That is representing that the average age of the population is actually rising. People are living more years, and they're not dying in their early ages or the middle ages, right? So question number 26 is a good question, and you can clearly see that a question does definitely comes in your from the chapter of population and living standards. So question 26, it says at the start of the year a developing country had a population of a million, right? Its birth rate was 16.0 per thousand per annum, okay, and its death rate was 8 per thousand per annum. At the end of the year, the population was 1,005,000. What could explain this change in the population? First of all, the factors that affect population are the number of births, right, the number of deaths, and the number of net migration. If your net migration is positive, it means more people, the people who are coming in are greater than the people who are going out. That is, you can say immigration exceeds emigration. If the net migration is, let's say, negative, it means more people going out than people who are coming in, which means emigration exceeds immigration, right? So now let's see what's happening in this question. First of all, it says that its birth rate was 16 per thousand. So out of 1,000 people, if 16 people were born out of every 1,000 people, so if the population is 1 million, then what is the birth rate out of a population of 1 million? So if you calculate that, if you cross multiply that, you'll get the answer. It would be a million into 16 divided by 1,000 would give you 16,000, which means that the number of births were 16,000. If you start with the opening population, which is your million, that is the population at start of the year, which is at start of the year, and which means that births are adding to the population, that is why you'll add it. The deaths will reduce your population, so you do the same. Out of 1,008 per thousand per annum was the rate. So out of a population of a million, what was your death rate out of that population size? So 1 million times 8 divided by 1,000 would give you 8,000, and deaths would reduce the population size. Now you don't really know what is happening, whether your net migration is positive or negative, so you leave that figure as X, and your ending population is actually coming as how much. The ending population is coming as 1,000, a million and 5,000. So you what you do is that you just calculate the value of X, and the value of X, you just move backwards. You add 8,000, you work backwards, you add 8,000, and then you deduct 16,000, and then you deduct a million. So I'm doing the solution calculation by myself as well on the side. So you add 8,000, and then you deduct 16,000, and then you deduct a million. So the correct answer would come to 3,000, right? So the correct answer is 3,000, and it's actually coming as negative 3,000. So if it's coming as negative 3,000, it means that the net migration is negative, which means there are more people exiting the country, which means that there are more immigrants. There are 3,000 more immigrants exiting the country. So assuming in this MCQ that the number of people who came in the country were 0, let's assume that for this MCQ's sake. So the correct answer would be C, that there were 3,000 immigrants who left the country. Because and logically, if you want to solve this MCQ, there's another way of solving the MCQ as well. You say that there were 1 million people at start, and then there were 16,000 more that were added. The 8,000 died. So the correct answer should be, the correct answer should be 1,008,000. But how many are left? There are only a million and 1,005,000 are left, which means that obviously 3,000 exited the country. That is why this is the answer. So C is the correct answer. So remember three things. Just remember three things: the birth rate, the death rate, and the net migration rate affects the population size. Moving to question number 27, it says that what is the benefit of tariff. So the benefit of tariff is, first of all, what is a tariff? So the tariff is basically a protectionist measure, or your trade protectionist, or your trade barrier measure, where the government imposes a tariff or a percentage of tax on your imports, and that increases the price of the imports. So obviously one of the benefits of tariff is that there will never be increased choice, because there will be less choice, since less will be imported now as imports get expensive. So there would be increase in government revenue, yes, because now the government, because whatever is imported at a much higher price, and that higher price represents the difference of the initial price and the new price. That is the new import price minus the old import price. The new import price minus the old import price, whatever the difference is your tariff revenue for the government, right? Question number 28. Which name is given to the external value of a currency in terms of another currency? So obviously it's the exchange rate, because the exchange rate is the rate at which one currency is exchanged for the other currency. So obviously the rate at which, for instance, the rate at which $1 would be sold to buy let's say rupees is let's say 150 rupees, right? So we can say that $1 is worth 150 rupees externally, and 150 rupees is worth externally as a dollar as well. So that is the external value of the currency in terms of the other currency. Question 29 says it was reported that in 2011 that the United States needed to achieve a lower current account deficit. So current account is part of balance of payment and one of the most important components that determine whether the balance of payment will be in a deficit or surplus and overall. Capital and financial account are not in your syllabus, but still you should know them. You should know the logics behind them. What would help this in the short run? So basically you're trying to reduce your deficit, so that could be achieved by actually improving your exports and actually reducing your imports. So export revenues should actually rise and import expenditures should actually fall. So definitely a protectionist policy would help this achieve in the short run. Question number 30 says, and this is a good question as well, it says the table shows the number of units of foreign currency that the UK pound could buy in August and 2012 and in August 2013. So what can be concluded from the table about the change in currency values between 2012 and 2013? So they're asking you, usually these kind of MCQs come where they give you a table and you ask, and they give you different options and they ask you, what can you conclude from them? It's not a difficult MCQ as it seems. So I would suggest that these kind of MCQs, conclusion-based MCQs, where they ask you conclusion to derive out of it, whether a table is drawn or a bar chart is drawn or diagrams are drawn, and those kind of MCQs you should leave it for the end, when you're super confident about all the rest of the MCQs that you have attempted, and then you can it's not that you have to attempt the paper in order. It's an MCQ paper. Okay, so 30, it says what can be concluded from the table. So first let's see what is option A telling us. The option A is telling us the Argentine peso. So the Argentinian peso appreciated against the UK pound. So first of all, if 1 pound is equal to, let's say, 7.16 peso in 2012, So in 2013, what happened in 2013? 1 pound was worth 8.35 peso, which means that pound is appreciating, right? Because 1 pound could buy 8.35 pesos, which means the value of the pound is increasing. So the peso is actually depreciating, because now you require more pesos to buy the same 1 pound. You require 8.35 pesos. Instead, previously last year, you required 7.16 pesos to buy 1 pound. So basically, pesos is getting weak. So A is not the right answer. B says the Argentinian peso depreciated against the euro. Now over here they have given us the UK's exchange rate, or how much 1 pound is worth in terms of pesos, the South African rand, and the euros. But here they're asking you the exchange rate of peso with the euro. So let's see how will we do this kind of an MCQ. So first of all, you need to understand that, let's say if I say that in 2012, let's say in 2012, if 1 pound is equal to 7.16 peso, then and 1 pound is also equal to 1.27 euros as well, right? Because 1 pound is equal to 7.16 peso, and it is also equal to 1.27 euros as well, because it's written rate per pound, right? So if 1 pound is equal to 7.16 pesos and 1 pound is also equal to 1.27 euros, instead of 1 pound I can write 7.16 pesos is equal to 1.27 euros, which means that I should calculate the value of how much 1 peso is worth in terms of euros. So I will do that by dividing 1.27 by 7.16. So if I divide 1.27 by 7.16, I get a value of, let's say, 0.18. So this is telling us that 1 pound is worth 0.8 euros in 2012. I'll do the same thing for in 2013 as well. So I'll say that 8.35 pesos are worth, let's say, 1.14 euros, right? The same mechanism that I did over here, I'll just do the same mechanism. So the value of 1 peso in terms of euros would be, so I need to divide 1.14 by 8.35. So I get, how much I get a value of, if I convert it, so I get a value of 0.14, right? So it gets, so it tells, so you can now see that here peso was initially worth 0.18 euros, now it's only worth 0.14 euros, which means that peso has actually depreciated against the euro, and that is why B is the correct answer. So that's it, guys. This is it. This was a good paper to solve. I'll see you around in the next paper. Hope you all enjoyed. Take care.